Mexican official confirms jetliner from Cancun hijacked on runway at Mexico City Airport. That's all there is. CNN, just watching it during the break, is saying that maybe getting the people off the plane. 999, you knew something would happen. Can't wait till this day's over. The globalists are obsessed with numerology. Flip 999 over. What do you get? And, of course, we're coming up on 9/11. I don't believe in that stuff, but they sure do. We're going to recap all the huge new developments with the Charlie Sheen exclusive interviews here. He was live today. That's coming up in the first hour of the show. I didn't announce it right at first, but he popped in at the bottom of the hour. And we aired in its entirety, a never-before-heard interview I did with him a few weeks ago at his home. That 21-minute interview aired in the second hour. And so that is all coming up again at the retransmission points at Infowars.com and on your local AM and FM stations, Global Shortwave, WWCR, and the satellite. Going back to Professor Stephen Jones in the 10 minutes we have left with him, then I'm going to cover financial news and some other issues. Professor Jones, you were making a point about...
Right.
So you got the paint that was on the steel, not the same thing.
Right. It's not at all the same. It's very distinct from the red grey chip material. Yeah, the paint, just to recap that, as we looked at it using the electron microscopy system and X-ray dispersive spectroscopy, that's that term. And I tell people that will be on the quiz, and, I appreciate when people make an effort to understand some of the things that we're trying to do. We're probing with electron beams. We're looking at the material that's in the dust. We're finding this pyrotechnic or explosive material. I think people understand that is significant. It shouldn't be there in quantities like that. I mean, this is an office building, for heaven's sakes, and the one sample was collected within 20 minutes of the fall of the second tower, the north tower. So this cannot be contaminated by cleanup operations. There were no cleanup operations 20 minutes after the second tower collapsed. This was a fellow, Frank D'Alessio, scooped that up, got that dust. We found an abundance of these red-gray chips in that sample. And his friend, Breidenbach, also testified. We have their testimony on tape. The chain of custody is clear, straight to me, and Jeff Fair, Dr. Fair at BYU. So again, when we compare the primer paint, this is from steel in a monument at a Clarkson College in New York State. Compare that primer paint with these red-gray chips. They are not the same at all. The primer paint always shows zinc in abundance. There's a reason for that. And always shows potassium, always shows magnesium. This is a fresh surface now. You break off a chunk and you look at the edge, so that you're not talking about dust now. You're talking about what's in the actual material. So the paint shows those elements, zinc, potassium, magnesium, always, whereas the red material never shows those elements. It's completely distinct.
What are the chips? Are you saying it's nanothermite?
It certainly has that characteristic. I'm persuaded that it is nanothermite. I mean, it's an explosive material in the sense, or pyrotechnic in the sense that it reacts violently. We published that in our nanothermite paper in the Open Chemical Physics.
And you wouldn't put a accelerant, you wouldn't put something explosive as fireproofing on buildings.
Absolutely. No, absolutely not. It's a very dangerous material. You wouldn't want to breathe it in either, Alex, I might say. That's another, like asbestos, it's one of those bad actors that was in the dust. The EPA told us it was safe. Of course, there's an example of the government lying to us. And in that case, the whistleblower, Nikki Tinsley, was the EPA general inspector, and she blew the whistle on the EPA for lying to the people about the safety of the dust.
And by the way, 7 years ago, they would call it a conspiracy theory. You said Christina Todd Whitman was covering up for Bush. Later, it came out that one of her reports said the dust is dangerous. In the first week, the White House said, shut that down.
That's right. And the EPA Inspector General Tinsley, she spelled that out and wrote that up in a report, and it got into the press. I think it was in 2003 that truth came out about what the EPA had done. So, it's a clear example of where the government high level, the White House, you'd say, has lied to us. And so now here we're having to ferret this out. NIST refuses to look for explosives or explosive residues in the World Trade Center dust. Well, we've done so, and we challenge them to do so, But they have just adamantly refused. And their excuse is, well, if you look for something that isn't there, you won't find it. And I'm saying, excuse me, how do you know it's not there until you look, But it's just really remarkable. And if I may throw in another one, which, of course, was missed by the Nat Geo program, that is the free-fall acceleration of World Trade Center 7 for over 2 seconds, and that's over 100 feet. The roof was measured by David Chandler. I looked at this at 2, but to David's credit, he plotted the data, and showed this is essentially free-fall. And then he and I both challenged NIST. Remember last August they had this forum where you could send in questions by email, which I did and he did. We both challenged them on their statements about the rate of fall of the World Trade Center 7. And sure enough, NIST, now this is a little bit to their credit, they came back and plotted the data. It agrees. It lines up with free fall acceleration. It lines up with what David Chandler and I were trying to say. And so they admitted that, but to their great discredit, they did not go back and say, well, this is really strange. That means there's nothing impeding the fall. That's what free fall means. There's nothing in the way. Now, you've got hundreds of thousands of tons of steel and concrete. These beams don't just give up and disappear. Their mass alone would slow the roof down, but nothing slowed it down. Now, that takes explosives to move this material out of the way. It's a prime evidence for explosives, along with the red chips that we have found. But what NIST did, they swept that data. They showed the plot, but then they say, oh, this is consistent with our computer model. That's the end of that. We're not going to discuss it anymore. And so, that a computer model, which they will not let us test, it just can't be, Alex, having hundreds of thousands of tons of material in the way and you get free fall. Unless they took that out of the computer model, which actually you can do in a computer simulation, but you can't do that in real life unless you use explosives to move the material out of the way.
But Underwriting Laboratories, in their own report, said that they did fire testing for similar things and it didn't make anything collapse.
And it did not fail, right? Kevin Ryan pointed that one out, and he lost his job over making that one public. As I recall, that was the issue.
That's right. You were persecuted, no doubt, and driven out of your professorship, even though you were one of the top lights at that university. Huge developments and discoveries in your own right. But the truth is the truth, and God loves you for what you've done, and the American people do. I hear there's a film coming out soon with a lot of the material that you've presented in it.
With material that I presented included in a bill?
No, in a film. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. A film, yes, yeah. Dylan Avery and his guys are doing one. Is that the one you're talking about?
Well, there's that one, but I've seen other stuff on the web. I guess a lot of people are just taking your material then and making films. That is very, very exciting, Professor.
Yeah, and it's not. Again, I have to emphasize, it's not just me, Alex. I worked with Niels Harrit and Dr. Fair, Kevin Ryan, Frank Leahy, Brad Larson, Danny Farnsworth. Yeah,
these are a lot of serious engineers and physicists and scientists that have a lot to lose. And I remember you talking about the professor at BYU. He just said, "Well, I'll look at it." And then, of course, he found what you found. And we all wish this wasn't true. I wish this wasn't the case.
Right.
But I wish 3 years ago I had medical doctors on and they said, "Look, in the trials of Gardasil, human papillomavirus vaccine, it's killing girls and maiming and paralyzing them." And I went on air and talked about it and got made fun of by the media. And then now it's all over the news. Everywhere I turn, where the human papillomavirus shot is killing or maiming or paralyzing people. We're just trying to tell the truth here. It's not enjoyable, I'll tell you.
I totally agree with you, and it does. There's a personal cost, as you and I both know. I wanted to ask you, Alex, if I can turn the tables just for a minute. I'm really curious what you're finding out about this vaccine for the swine flu. I'm sorry if I changed the topic, but I just got to ask you that question. Do you have any I'm sure you have some strong feelings, but any advice on what we can do about what's coming down the pike?
You know, there's so many pieces of political data, socioeconomic data, so many medical doctors and scientists and virologists I've interviewed, and all the different perspectives. It's almost like I've overanalyzed it to the point of, we know it's a lie, we know it's a fraud. We knew in January they were gearing up for quarantines, mass graves, federalization, Northcom to put 400,000 troops on the streets. And we saw all these movements in January. I went on air and said, I believe it's flu-related, because emergency managers in Chicago and in Indiana were telling me this, and in upstate New York. Then I got secret documents and published them. And we said, this isn't a drill. They're not using this just as a cover for federalization.